Y'all like puppets? So the title of this video is my first time watching Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal, because it was my first time watching Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal, which is obvious but significant to me because I feel like I should have watched it a long time ago. If you're completely unfamiliar with The Dark Crystal, it's this really weird feature-length charcuterie board of super creative world building and practical effects work released in 1982, and it was written and directed by one of my personal heroes, Jim Henson. Now, on an arguably more important note, if you don't know about Jim Henson, he's the one who made this guy and these guys and turned David Bowie into the Goblin King, and I love him for that. So looking at Jim Henson's career, he made Sesame Street, releasing in 1969. He made The Muppet Show, releasing in 1976. And then the 80s came around and he was like, you know what? Why don't we give some kids nightmares in the 80s? That'd be fun. So he did. Henson teamed up with the likes of co-director Frank Oz, who you may know from directing such movies as Little Shop of Horrors and What About Bob, also providing the voices for iconic characters like Miss Piggy and Fozzie Bear and freaking Yoda. Also on the team was fantasy illustrator and concept artist Brian Froud, whose work is just crazy and beautiful and paired up so well with Jim Henson's more eclectic, experimental side. That team up actually did continue later on for 1986's Labyrinth, which is a movie that I have seen and do not like as much as I like The Dark Crystal. Though maybe it's time to give it a second try. I do love that worm. He's good. He's my favorite part. So, if you don't know about the monomyth, it's this narrative device and template used by hundreds and hundreds of authors and literary scholars for years and years and years. And if you don't know about it, there's a bunch of videos you can watch that explain it better than I can. So I don't want to waste your time by talking about it a bunch, but I am going to waste your time by talking about it a bunch. Specifically, I want to talk about Act 1 of the monomyth and the events parallel within the Dark Crystal, because I think there was a lot of places here that could have been improved upon for the sake of exposition and the audience's understanding. However, I think there's also certain sections where they subvert expectations really well, and I want to mention those too. And so within Act 1 of the monomyth, there is the ordinary world, call to adventure, refusal, and meeting the mentor. There's also crossing the threshold, which I don't care about. So I don't have anything to say. So let's start at the beginning of the movie, where one can expect to be introduced to the world that we're in and get some exposition so we understand what the status quo is. That's very easy in certain movies where we're familiar with the kind of environment that we're in. But that's just so not the case with this film. Now, there is a bit of narration at the beginning of the film, but it lacks any meaningful visuals that the audience can latch onto, so it takes quite a bit of in-world exposition for that to really stick. As effective as that in-world exposition is, it's actually a really good thing we got that narration in the first place. When I first went to watch Dark Crystal, I actually found an unofficial director's cut, which was supposed to be closer to Jim Henson's original vision for the film. Now, Jim, I love you. That vision was stupid. When I first went to watch the movie, there was absolutely no narration for the first 3 minutes of intro sequence. Now, honestly, the lack of narration wouldn't have been the end of the world for me. I did watch the Netflix prequel series Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, so I'm at least a little bit familiar vaguely with who these characters are. With a little character spoken exposition, I would have been fine. But also in this director's cut, the Skeksis, who are the main villains of the story and take up a considerable amount of screen time, do not speak a language that we understand and are not subtitled. Now, I can see how that would be interesting, Jim, if the Skeksis didn't have so much narrative significance. But there's so many scenes that are just Skeksis. It's just the Skeksis there, and in the film you released, they sound like this.
He's not dead yet, my Lord Chamberlain.
That's great, Jim. Why'd you want him to sound like this? I eventually did find somewhere to watch the officially released film, and I'm very grateful that I did. because it took me actually looking up the script to know that there was even anything wrong. But anyway, my point with all of this is that the film never really seemed that concerned with having the audience understand the status quo of the world that it was taking place in, which is kind of beautiful in a way. We just kind of get dropped into this world that we have never experienced and that we know nothing about, and get to understand it as the characters in the story start to experience it. And so, as I said before, this film reads as a extensive world building exercise for Jim Henson and his team. And I love that we get to view it like that, but I think that this style could have been a little bit alienating for a lot of audiences, and I believe it originally was either way, and I could see how that would be a turnoff at the beginning of the film. So, get ready for a lore drop, because before I go on, I gotta explain about the Mystics and the Skeksis, and oh boy, are you in for a treat. I already briefly showed the Skeksis, who are the bad guys if you couldn't tell based on the way that they look. But the Mystics, on the other hand, are these cool old monk dudes who have 4 arms and do magic by singing really low-pitched jazz chords. I'm not saying that Jacob Collier is a mystic in disguise, but I haven't found any definitive evidence that suggests otherwise. So the Mystics are the good boy versions of the Skeksis, and they all came into existence together, and every one of them is connected to another of the opposite group. And we see this at the beginning of the movie when the Emperor of the Skeksis and the Master or Wisest of the Mystics are both dying, and they're connected, so they're both dying at the same time. I honestly really like this detail because it gives us some immediate exposition as to what kind of people the Mystics and the Skeksis are. We get to see them deal with the death of a leader and show how they honor and respect the dead. There's scenes of the Skeksis arguing over who's going to be the next emperor and even trying to steal things off of his deathbed, where on the other hand, the Mystics are coming together as a community to honor their fallen master, and mourning together and doing the ceremony where they make all of the master's belongings just vanish, or go to the afterlife to be with him. I don't know. The point is that it very clearly illustrates the dichotomy between the Mystics and the Skeksis. And this dichotomy is not subtle, but it is well done. It's very clearly good versus evil, but we know that right away. You can just look at them and know that right away, but showing how they're exactly connected and showing them react to pretty much the same event in both of their communities is really cool to me, because I'm a freaking nerd. So after loosely establishing this ordinary world, we go on to meet the hero of our story, who receives his call to adventure in one of the most literal senses I've ever seen, and it kind of bugs me a little bit. The hero of the Dark Crystal, or one of the heroes, more on that later, is this guy, whose name is Jen, and is the last of the Gelfling. Or is he? More on that later. Gelflings are a species that are unique to the world of Thra, but aren't far off of pretty standard races we see in other fantasy media. They have a few unique abilities that we can go into later, but overall there's nothing that remarkable other than the fact that a Gelfling was prophesied to return the missing shard to the Dark Crystal at the time of the convergence of the Three Suns and eliminate the Skeksis, thereby ending their tyrannical rule. So yeah, not much to say about that. Anyway, the Skeksis killed all the Gelfling, except for Jen, who was saved by the Master of the Mystics, who raised him through his whole life until this point where he is dying. So Jen is called in to the Master on his deathbed, who explains to him that he is that chosen Gelfling who needs to find the Shard of the Dark Crystal and return it to the Dark Crystal. We're going to hear a lot about the Dark Crystal. Oh, and then he just vanishes. He dies. Master dies, but he does it in that cool like 70s, 80s movie way where he just kind of like slow dissolves out. So it's like dying, but in the way where like maybe he'll be in our hearts all along. He never comes back and like tells Jen to use the Force though, so he's dead. He's gone. Meanwhile, two Skeksis are fighting over who gets to be emperor by taking turns hitting a rock really hard. I actually love this scene. They call it trial by stone, and they bring out these two big swords, and so I thought it was just going to be a sword fight, which I was kind of disappointed by, but that would be too hard to do with puppets. So they hit rock. They hit big rock. Good job, guys. Anyway, my point here is that this just seemed like a lazy call to adventure for me. While it was effective and got Jen moving, it's really the first thing we see happen to him, and so there's no reason for us to really relate to him or care about him or his life at this point. All that said, the second half of Act 1 is fantastic and pretty easily makes up for the first half. So next we get to see the rejection of the call and meeting the mentor, which are both some of my favorite parts of the film because it's where we start to actually get to relate to Jen and also get to know this world and see how he reacts to it, and it just feels like the purposes of the film are actually being met here. It's also at this point when Jen is leaving home that he says one of the funniest lines of the entire movie.
I'm not ready to go alone. All right? Alone then.
Jen then starts his journey and continues to become more relatable with such wonderful quotes as,
This place is weird.
and of course,
I don't like this.
Anyway, on the Skeksis side of things, this dude called Chamberlain couldn't hit a rock hard enough, so they took all of his clothes and kicked him out of the castle. Interestingly, this is also the only point I think where we can see that Skeksis actually also have a second set of arms like the Mystics do. They're just these teeny little skinny guys. According to the wiki, they got weak over time because the Skeksis live a lazy sedentary lifestyle, which makes sense. Have you seen them walk? They are so slow. They are so slow. What was a surprise, despite having seen the series where this is actually featured, was the revelation that the Skeksis canonically have 3 urethras. Why?
That's not bad.
I don't like this.
At first I was excited to share that information with you, but that clip is extremely upsetting and I apologize. Now eventually Jen finds Agra, who we're led to believe is supposed to be the mentor figure in this story. She is in a way because she does help him find the crystal, but she doesn't really do a lot to help him navigate the world or actually get anywhere in his journey other than getting him the thing that he needs. She kinda is because she's the reason that Jen is able to get the crystal shard and move on. But she's not the Jedi Master-esque character that I at least expected her to be. Though, that's my fault. I shouldn't have had expectations of a character in this movie. More specifically, Jen was told that Agra held the shard, which I expected to be more in a fantasy style of he has to earn the shard somehow, or she has a map to where the shard is, or he has to prove that he's worthy of it. I don't know. I just didn't expect her to just dump out a burlap sack full of crystals. But then she dumped out a burlap sack full of crystals and was like, pick one. I don't know what it is. I'm old. So Jen plays his flute and it glows and the Garthim show up, who are like the Skeksis Nazgul, but they're big bugs. But anyway, Jen leaves out the window and leaves Agra very overwhelmed with the situation. It's also at this point that we learn that Chamberlain has also tracked Jen just as fast as the Garthim did, which to me seems like an impossibility just based on how slow the Skeksis move. But he's here lurking in the shadows going, This is the part in my script writing process where I stopped typing carefully and started just rambling into the voice recognition. And so it's about to get weird.
Exploration!
So remember that point in the video where I talked about how the status quo wasn't well established in this movie? I was right, and I couldn't be happier about that. It seems like at this point in the movie on, every scene introduces new weird little details and world building elements that you just don't get in most movies, especially considering the medium it was done in, puppetry. It's super impressive that they were able to build the amount of stuff that they had to physically build for this. It really feels like you're just in another world watching this guy walk around. And that's not for everybody, I think, because the audience is completely clueless to what's going on. But the nice thing is that Jen is also completely clueless. And so we just get to follow him on his journey and see new things, and it's super cool, and I like that. One of the first big examples of this is that we find out, surprise, Jen's not the only gelfling in the world. There's another one. Her name's Kira, and she's kind of way cooler than Jen. Like I mentioned before, I said that there was another kind of mentor character. Kira is basically another mentor character. She's the reason Jen survives this and actually gets to the castle in the end of the story. I don't think he could have done it on his own. In fact, I would speculate that maybe the prophecy that was mentioned at the beginning could have been just as much about Jen as it is about Kira. And that's kind of cool. So it's at this point that it would take me way too long to go over all of the details that Jim Henson and his team put in that I really liked about this movie, because there's just so much going on in every scene. But one thing that I have to talk about, because it only happens once and they never really talk about it again. They talk about it more in the prequel series, so I knew about it, but it's so weird in the context of this movie, is when Jen meets Kira. He's knocked over and she reaches out to help him up, and they touch hands and go into this weird trip sequence for at least like a full minute where they just share all of their memories from their whole lives with each other. Then they get up and Jen's like, what was that? And Kira was like, that was dream fasting, you dummy. That's what gelflings do. Which, I think I caught you, Jim. Because this doesn't make sense. Because in Kira's memories, she says the first thing she remembered is fire and the war and the Skeksis coming to kill her whole family. And so if that's her first memory, how does she have any memory of dream fasting and what it's called? She couldn't have known. There was no gelfling to dream fast with, you silly. And these details are obviously very important and worth your time. And sure, maybe she meant the first thing she remembers about the war was that it was the fire, and she could have had memories before that. And shut up. So this is the point where they start their adventure together, and Kira takes Jen to meet the Podlings, who are these cute other people who Kira has been living with since the Skeksis killed all the gelfling. But they're not there for long before the Garthim show up, totally wreck their party, which was a rad-looking party, by the way. And then Jen and Kira run away, but then Chamberlain catches them and is like, "Ooh, come back to castle on good terms, have peace." He talks like that, I promise. But he's definitely lying and is gonna take them to die. And so they see right through that and are like, no, we run away now. Also, at some point, Jen and Kira reenact the boat scene from Tangled, which is fun. And after escaping from the Garthim and the Skeksis, they go ride Landstriders to get to the castle, and the Landstriders are rad and cool, and I like them a lot.
Hi. Ignore the crappy audio and video for a second. I just was editing and put in the part with the Landstriders, and I realized that Jen says this.
All right, together then.
Which is a parallel to that funny line at the beginning of the movie where he says, "All right, alone then," right after he says he's not ready to go alone. And so what I thought was a funny throwaway line at the beginning of the movie turned out to be like a thematic piece through the whole thing. So that's good. Back to quality content.
So to wrap it up, the exploration in this movie is really cool and really well done, and I like it a lot. It really feels like at some point Jim Henson and his team had built an entire planet to film on, because there's just so many little details that they put into it. It really takes probably more than one viewing to appreciate all of it. However, I viewed it once. So there you go. Oh, and you might have seen this guy, whether it was in this video or somewhere else in the world. His name is Fizzgig. and I kind of hate him. I watched the movie a while before writing this part of the script, so I had to look over the footage again to remember why I hate him. But for the entire movie, other than one specific scene at the very end, Fizzgig does nothing to help and just screams a lot. When I say screams a lot, I mean it genuinely feels like whoever recorded this just stood way too close to the mic for every single take.
Dole. Oh. Oh, all right. Come on. Tamar.
I'm looking at you, Percy Edwards. One thing I can appreciate about Fizzgig is that he's the only creature of his kind in the movie. So in the overall Dark Crystal lore, his species is just called Fizzgig. He's Fizzgig. So if you are a fan of spherical scream dogs with multiple rows of teeth, you are in for a treat here. Every single scene in this movie is insane and so full of unique and interesting stuff. But you don't got the time, and I don't have the brain power to do it justice. So wrap it up. I like this movie. I'm sure you could already tell, and I'll admit I was a bit biased going into it because of my pre-existing admiration for Jim Henson and the Dark Crystal franchise. But either way, I'm happy to say it lived up to my expectations. Not that my expectations matter. I'm just a guy. There's a few more things I hope to comment on in the end of the movie, such as the revelation that female Gelfling can fly, the Mystics' continued indifference on their own mortality, also how slow they walk. There is a lot of shots of them just walking really slow. And there's a point where we're led to believe that Fizzgig dies for a moment. It turns out to not be true because the devil can't die. So to wrap it up, Jen and Kira sneak into the castle. They have a showdown with the Skeksis. Kira gets stabbed and dies. Or does she? More on that later. Jen makes the crystal whole again, and it turns out to not be so dark after all. At this point, the Mystics merge with the Skeksis, creating the Urskeks, who are these weird, wild-looking angel, fairy, alien dudes with creepy tree branch-looking hair. If I'm being honest, these guys, character design-wise, are a downgrade from the Mystics and the Skeksis, in my opinion. But we only have to look at them for a couple minutes, so it's okay. One fun fact about them is in the original script, they were only ever called light creatures and never referred to by any other name, which leads me to infer, at least, that the whole lore of them being the Urskeks and where they came from and what kind of beings they were came later on, probably in the comic books. But I have not read the comic books, so could be wrong. Just a guy. Also, on the side of merchandising, Plan B Toys once released this 6-inch bust of an Urskek, leading me to hope for their sake that they had a Plan C. That's it. That's the best joke in the video. So, I just want to end with one thing that I think really encapsulates the entire thesis statement of this film as it pertains to the characters in the film, to our experience in watching it, and Jim Henson's purpose in creating the entire Dark Crystal universe. And to do so, all we have to do is listen to the words of this creepy freaking light monster.
Hold her to you. She is part of you, as we all are part of each other. Crystal of truth. Make your world in its light.
Those are the last spoken words of the film. I apologize for including a long clip there, but I definitely want to touch on all of that in some way. I've said it from the beginning of the video, but this film serves one purpose above all others in my eyes, and that is world building. I can't get enough of how well it's done, and honestly, writing this video has just made me want to watch the Netflix series again, just to see what new things I can catch on to, and how much it builds on what Henson and his team established here. The words spoken to end this film really stick with me in a special way because of the type of movie it is. saying that we're all part of each other just as we get done experiencing this wild, unique world made with pure creativity. It really parallels my real life experiences learning about the world I live in and exploring it bit by bit, knowing that it is dangerous and scary sometimes, but also knowing that I have people that are going to be there for me and that are a part of me as much as I am a part of them. Jim Henson made an amazing, beautifully strange world that we get to experience fleetingly through the Dark Crystal, but I think he might have been trying to say more about our relationships that we have with the world and those that are living here with us. The light creature finally says that they are left with the Crystal of Truth and instructed to build their world in its light. This is massive for these characters who have lived their whole life under the rule of the Skeksis. And it can even kind of reflect an Adam and Eve type situation, as this like almost heavenly looking character is telling this man and woman to build their world up. Maybe, but I don't really think so. I think that there's a lot more to be said about the real world implications to it, and that I don't believe we were meant to dig that deep into their side and what really happens after this. But you can if you want. Greater than the importance of this instruction towards the characters, I would say, is this instruction towards us, both as advice and as a reflection of Henson's experience in creating the Dark Crystal. He had a very unique opportunity where he had the resources and creative drive to build a world from scratch. I am personally a firm believer that creativity in all of its forms is what can bring us the greatest joys in life, and I can just feel the passion and joy leaking from this project. I think in a way you could say that Jim Henson had the Crystal of Truth in him as he built the world of Thra. And additionally, I think he's trying to say that we all have a bit of the Crystal of Truth in us as well. We all have an opportunity to make a difference in the world in the small ways we can every day, living and building under the light of our own truth, even when it does feel like real-life Skeksis are hoarding the crystal to themselves and hiding away in their castles. And I feel like that too, and I feel like I don't have a lot of control over the world around me. But in the end, this story was about very, very small people making a huge difference in the world that they live in. And that was my first time watching The Dark Crystal. Bye.